So I went to Cornell with the idea that Cornell is a land-grant college and they have a school of agriculture. That my idea was to come back and be a part of the farm, and I had a choice. And the choices that I was exploring were either go back on the farm and become part of the farm operation in a more full-time basis, or my father really wanted me to go to work with him in the insurance agency and begin to become a part of the insurance business. And I was really, in my junior year in college, really trying to contemplate what would be the better choice. And my dad had paid for me to take an insurance broker's course while I was at Cornell, with the idea that I could begin to understand what it would mean to be in the insurance agency. And I was going to work for him this summer between my junior and senior year. And that's when the Fayette County, or the West Tennessee project, came into my life. Yeah, that's a very interesting story. But by the end of my junior year, or by my junior year, put it that way, I had been involved in the fraternity, and I had actually been the president of the fraternity. And our fraternity was, like probably most fraternities, pretty party-oriented, and spent a lot of time on recreational activities. There was not really a sense of community investment or community involvement that lots of fraternities have today. It was really a place to live, and a social club. And I found myself, I guess, getting tired of that, and moved out of the fraternity and moved into, I just looked for a room outside of the fraternity and found an attic in a house that was owned by a family from New York City who had bought the house for his son, just as a way of, one, I think they could afford it, and two, it was a interesting way of having an asset by the time the son was through school. So, and they were resourceful enough to do that. So his name was Bob Keel, and he rented out rooms in addition to having room for himself. And I rented this attic, and in that house, renting another room, was this person, Bert Weiss, who was from New York City and was an intellectual in every sense of the word, and was very engaging as a person. And he and I became friends. And as it turns out, he had been down to Tennessee in 1964 on the project that we're talking about, the West Tennessee Voters Project. And the part that I actually cannot really get my arms around is that he convinced me that I should check this out, and he convinced me to go. And so I've always been struck by the fact that someone who is as opposite as me, New York City, intellectual, an activist. In every sense, he was a radical. He was involved in SDS. He was involved in student protests on campus. He was, in every way, a person that was just not like me. And we got to be friends, and I invited him to the farm, and it was just like going to a foreign country for him to visit Middlesex. And out of that, I trusted him enough to explore this idea. But I honestly, 50 years later, I can't point to some specific event that said, you really need to go to West Tennessee on a civil rights project in 1965. Unless I bring it to full circle, which maybe we'll talk about later, is that I do believe that for me personally, it was God sending me a very strong message. Wow. So the way this worked is that there were a group of students that we came down together, and the organization that was headed by Professor Douglas Dowd had bought cars for us to travel with and to use while we're down here. So I traveled down with 3 or 4 people whose names I can't even remember anymore. And it took a couple of days, and I remember we stayed at some professor's house at least one night of a college someplace on the way from Ithaca down to Fayette County. And then we got down here and we were assigned a geographic area to work. It was a district within Fayette County, and we were immediately housed in a sharecropper's house. The project paid the sharecropper's family some money to rent a room to us, and so I was in one that was literally a shack from anything I had experienced. It did not have running water. It was basically an open shack with one room that was obviously the parents' room. There was 2 or 3 kids, and they gave me that room, and they slept someplace else in the shack, and so I had the best room in the house, and they fed us breakfast. And so I'm going from Ithaca, Cornell life, living like most students were living, to this incredibly different world all of a sudden, and just literally waking up the next morning realizing that I was just in a completely different place than I'd ever been in my entire life. And fortunately, I was with Judy Miller, who had been down the summer before, and she was staying in a house, I think about 5 miles from where I was staying. And I was on her team, so I felt some security in the sense that Judy knew what she was doing and had done this before. And we immediately started meeting as a group to prepare for what we're going to be teachers in a freedom school concept, basically, to teach families about the importance of voting, the importance of voter education and voter registration. So I think we just got started at it, but the first impression was waking up in this shack on a dirt road with sharecroppers who absolutely just opened their doors to us. They were friendly, warm, inviting. The kids were great, and all of a sudden I'm in the midst of a completely new world for me. So it was a culture shock, would be a simple way of saying it. So initially we lived in Fayette County, and Fayette County then, and I think unfortunately still is, it was the 4th poorest county in the country at that time. And it was interesting that Professor Dowd, part of his work with us was giving us kind of a lecture almost every day on what was going on around the kind of the politics of segregation, the politics of how to present the idea that if you register to vote and you vote for people who care about your issues, that you can actually make change. That idea for people who had been essentially locked out of the political process for their entire experience, for generations and generations, was not an easy concept to communicate to people. In addition to the fact that the whites were incredibly intimidating and did everything in their power to prevent people from registering to vote. And that was a very brutal and violent and kind of a terrorist kind of environment which we were working, trying to bring a very complicated concept to people. So Doug Dowd kind of helped us frame that, and from an intellectual perspective, as well as tactically trying to talk about how it is that you would go about in these conversations with people, convincing them that they should take the risk to register to vote. So we were in Fayette County, and we were following a very historic civil rights event called Tent City. And I wasn't around for Tent City, but that Tent City was a symbol and a reality for hundreds of families who registered to vote between 1960 and 1965 when I was down there. They were actually thrown off their farms. They were as sharecroppers, literally thrown out of their livelihood, and they ended up putting together a tent city of several hundred families in 3 different sites, and that certainly was the backdrop for any organizing effort to try and convince people that they should try to really break the system. So initially I was in Fayette County working with Judy and visiting families and working in the Freedom School and trying to help people grasp the idea that they should go register to vote and actually driving them to register to vote. What I remember is that the people who were in charge, remember I was a 21-year-old student coming down. I was not in a leadership role of any kind. I was assigned to work with, in this case with Judy, to do this job of trying to convince people and working in the Freedom School. But from our trainings, what I would venture to understand from all that is that we were told never to go out at night, never to go out by yourself. Always make sure you're staying close to the environment in which where you're supposed to be working, and then there were stories of other of our workers getting beaten up, getting chased off the road, getting harassed by local white people as they were trying to run the organization. So I don't remember personally until I got up into Covington, which is another, I know we're going to get to that in a minute. That in Fayette County, I don't really remember personally experiencing any confrontation with the white people or with the KKK or anything like that, although that was all there. I think I was kind of isolated and insulated from that for my relatively short time there. We moved to a town called Covington, Tennessee. And Covington, Tennessee, and the reason we moved there is that the Western Tennessee Voters Project expanded in 1965 into 4 counties. Originally it was just in Fayette County, and it expanded into 4 counties. And again, I wasn't part of the decision-making process, but I think they asked Judy to go and be a part of this project to integrate a segregated school district, a school system. And because I was on her team, I went with her. That's what I think happened. Again, I wasn't in any leadership role. But we went to Covington, Tennessee to work with an organization, CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, led by a minister from Memphis, the Reverend James Smith. And our entire work shifted from the Freedom School to basically organizing. And so we were part of a group of Cornell students and a group of local, mostly young African Americans in providing a team of people to begin to do several things, but mostly to say integrate. We wanted to integrate public facilities. We wanted to integrate the facilities that we integrated was a restaurant, Paul's Sandwich Shop, which ended up getting us arrested and put into jail for a couple days. We were organizing an integration of 2 movie theaters in Covington, but most importantly, we were organizing a boycott of a school system that was set up so that the black kids could go to school in the summer and be off in the fall to pick cotton. It was basically the labor source for the cotton industry, which was huge in this whole region. And our job was to convince the parents and the children to boycott the summer session and force the school district to deal with the fact that that session was ending and that they'd have to be integrated into the regular school system in September. And then the school, at that time, the schools were completely segregated, and the white schools were passing down used books to the kids in the black school. It was totally separate and unequal in every way it could be described. And I think there was a tremendous amount of pent-up effort and energy by the local black community that this was the thing to do. And I think Reverend Smith was very effective and very charismatic and able to convince enough people to get behind this movement, and it just began to grow and grow and grow. And we were successful. We actually shut down the school system for the summer, and I think about 85% of the students did not go to school that summer. And we ended up organizing a 1,000-person march. That was the largest march they'd ever seen in that area. And we drove a caravan of families to Nashville to protest the treatment of black students to the Nashville Department of Education. And it turned out to be a very big transitional moment for education in that community. And so it was there that we did experience some of the violence and some of the terrorism that the black families also experienced. And so it was a very difficult, dangerous time. We had a cross burned in front of our house. I think there was a lot of effort to figure out how to divide the black community so that there would be fewer people supporting the boycott and trying to drive a wedge between the leadership and the black community. And again, I was not a part of that process, but knowing that the NAACP was kind of for the project and also trying to figure out how to work biracially in some way to try and appease the white community that this was could be done in a more gradual kind of way, of course. But the families stood up to it and said no, and it shut down the system. And I don't know exactly what happened in the fall, but I know that they ended up being integrated into the white schools, and I don't know exactly how that took place. I went back to Cornell, so I didn't really see the results of that, but there was a legitimate, real change in the educational process because of the boycott and the strong, just a strong coalescing of the families to support each other and to take the risk that included losing their jobs. It included being kicked out of their house if they were a tenant. It included all kinds of intimidation that they were facing from the white community as they stood up to their rights. It's an interesting arena to think about, and one of the areas that I've always wondered about is what was the real impact of having white students from the North coming down as freedom riders or as part of a project that was working in the South that was supposed to be indigenous to the civil rights movement, and what impact did that really make? Was it more beneficial to me as a white person, a young person getting this experience, or did it really make a difference? And I think the answer is probably both. That I certainly was not perceived as a leader, although there were some people in our organization that were clearly leaders in the effort with the leadership of the black community to try and decide what tactics to use, what decisions to make about where to organize. And I think there was a good deal of that. But I remember Douglas Dowd really pushing the idea that this is not our project, that we are there to be a part of a project that's being led by the local people. And I believe we did that. I think we followed their direction. I don't think, I certainly didn't, and I don't think Judy did, felt like we were instructing Reverend Smith in any way. It was the opposite way around, and he was asking us to do what he wanted us to do, and we did what we wanted to do. But when we would go to black churches and we would tell the story of the importance of equal rights, the importance of being able to get the same education as white people getting, when we said that, and we got many opportunities. Every Sunday we would be in 4, 5, 6 churches talking, and we'd always be invited to tell our story. Every church we went to. So there was a real sense of respect and of interest and curiosity maybe about white people speaking in a black church, and especially white people from out of town and didn't have the experience that they had with white people in their growing up. So there was, I think, I could see how that idea could go to somebody's head and think that, oh my God, I got this great power, I'm white, I can come down and convince all these people to do these things. That wasn't what was happening, but there was something about the idea that white people were witnessing whiteness in a way that was positive and meant something about being being connected to each other and having a similar commitment to correcting or to changing a segregated system that had been so exploitive and so incredibly oppressive to so many people for so many generations, that they treated us very nicely and with great respect, and I think that probably did make some difference in the way in which people felt like it was time to take this on. But we were also right in the midst of the national civil rights movement that was happening. Dr. King was certainly very active, not in our area, but we were part of the whole movement, and that we were one little project, but the civil rights movement was huge, and it was really moving across the country. And I think people in the local communities, the black people, decided it was time to stand up, that this was going to be now or never, and they did. So, it has transformed my life, but it might have been valuable in some small way to demonstrate that white people can be part of a change, can be part of creating opportunity, can be part of ways in which people could envision a new way of life, and that I was honored to be a part of that.